My name is Nathan, and for years I convinced myself that love could be earned through steady hands. Not speeches, not blood, just presence. When Emily and I moved into that quiet suburb outside Indianapolis, I thought I was stepping into the life I had always wanted. The streets were clean, the houses modest but cared for, the lawns cut with the kind of discipline that made everything look safer than it really was. At night, porch lights glowed like small promises. Families walked dogs after dinner. Kids left bicycles on driveways without fear.
It looked peaceful. I needed it to be peaceful. Emily had Mason and Chloe from her first marriage. I had Carter and Ava from mine. 4 children between us, none of them asking for the arrangement, all of them watching to see what kind of man I would become inside it. So I became useful. That was my first mistake. I paid for what needed paying. Private school tuition, baseball equipment, dance classes, summer camps, phone bills, vacations, car insurance, shoes that were outgrown before the receipt faded. I opened college savings accounts for Mason and Chloe and fed them every month in silence, the same way I supported Carter and Ava. I told myself fairness would build trust. I told myself consistency would become love. Mason was 12 when we moved in, already tall, already carrying that cold little pride boys sometimes develop when they think indifference makes them strong. Chloe was younger, sharper, always watching from behind her mother's shoulder before deciding whether I deserved an answer. I never pushed. I cooked breakfast, I drove them to school, I sat in bleachers through cold spring evenings while Mason played baseball under buzzing lights. I clapped for Chloe at dance recitals where I could barely see her through the rows of parents holding phones above their heads. Kevin, their biological father, came and went like bad weather, late, brief, unreliable. But when he appeared, Mason straightened. Chloe smiled. Emily softened, even when she pretended not to. Kevin could miss 6 months and still receive the kind of welcome I had spent years trying to earn. I noticed. God help me, I noticed everything. I noticed how Mason would tell people, "That's my mom's boyfriend," even after I had paid for the uniform on his back. I noticed how Chloe said, "My dad is picking me up," with pride, but when I arrived, she simply grabbed her bag and walked past me. I noticed how Emily heard these things and let them pass. "They're teenagers," she said. "They're adjusting," she said. "Don't take it personally." So I didn't. Or I pretended I didn't. That is what men like me do. We swallow the insult because the mortgage is due, because the fridge needs filling, because somebody has to keep the house from collapsing under all the words nobody is brave enough to say. Carter and Ava saw it too. They never complained, but children understand imbalance before adults admit it exists. Carter once asked me why Mason didn't have to answer when I spoke to him. Ava asked why Chloe rolled her eyes and Emily never corrected her. I had no good answer. So I gave them the answer weak men give when they are trying to look noble. Be patient. I was patient for years. Patient when Mason ignored curfew and laughed when I took his keys, because Emily gave them back the next morning. Patient when Chloe mocked the dinner I cooked, then asked me for money for a school trip 2 days later. Patient when Kevin forgot another birthday, and I stayed up wrapping gifts that would be praised only because Emily said they were from both of us. Patient when Mason told his friends he only had one father. Patient when Chloe corrected a teacher who called me her dad. That's just Nathan. Just Nathan. The name followed me around that house like a verdict. Still, I kept going, because stopping would have meant admitting the truth, and the truth was uglier than exhaustion. The truth was that I had built my entire place in that family on usefulness. If something broke, I fixed it. If something cost money, I paid it. If someone needed a ride, a signature, a check, a steady voice, I provided it. But no one asked how heavy it was. No one saw the hours behind the money. The extra projects, the missed sleep, the way I sat in my truck some evenings before walking inside, gathering enough strength to enter a home where I was needed, but not wanted. There is a special kind of loneliness that exists only in a full house. You hear laughter from the kitchen and know you are not the reason for it. You see family photos on the wall and realize your labor holds the frame, but your face barely belongs inside it. You sleep beside a woman who says she loves you, while her silence teaches her children they do not have to respect you. That silence did more damage than their words. Emily was not cruel. That might have been easier. Cruelty gives you something solid to fight. But Emily was soft in the places where she needed to be firm. She loved comfort. She loved peace. She loved the version of our family where I kept giving and her children kept taking and no one had to confront the rot underneath. Whenever I tried, she touched my arm and lowered her voice. "Nathan, please, don't make this bigger than it is." But it was big. It was the whole house. It was in the way Mason smirked when I reminded him to help with chores. It was in the way Chloe asked Emily for permission after I had already said no. It was in the way Kevin's failures became excuses, while my sacrifices became obligations. I kept waiting for gratitude to arrive. It never did. Instead, contempt grew comfortable. By the time Mason was 17 and Chloe was 15, they no longer bothered pretending. They took the vacations, the phones, the lessons, the accounts, the rides, the meals, and they gave me nothing but distance. Not confusion, not grief. Distance. Clean. Deliberate. Practiced. And still I stayed. Because I thought love meant endurance. I thought a man proved himself by remaining steady while everyone else tested how much he could bear. I thought one day Mason would look back and understand who stood in the rain beside the field. I thought Chloe would remember who paid for every costume, every competition, every dream she chased under bright stage lights. I thought Emily would finally defend me without being asked. I was wrong. The first cracks had been there from the beginning. I had simply mistaken them for growing pains. I had patched them with money, patience, and silence until the whole structure depended on me pretending not to hear it groan. Then came the evening that ended the pretending. Dinner was on the table. Carter and Ava were quiet. Emily was tired. Mason leaned back in his chair with that lazy arrogance I had come to recognize, and Chloe sat beside him wearing the same expression, like they shared some private joke at my expense. I asked Mason about a college visit. He laughed under his breath. I asked Chloe if she had finished her homework. She looked at Mason and smiled. Then Mason turned toward me, calm as a judge. Chloe did not stop him. Emily did not speak. And the two children I had carried for years looked at me like I was a stranger trespassing in my own home. "You're nothing to us," Mason said. Chloe nodded. Nothing. Not stepfather, not family. Not even a man worth lying to. Just nothing. The house was quiet after those words. Not peaceful, just empty in a way that made every sound feel louder than it should have. Mason leaned back in his chair as if he had simply commented on the weather. Chloe lowered her eyes to her plate with the faintest smile at the corner of her mouth, almost satisfied that someone had finally spoken what both of them had apparently believed for years. Emily stared at me. She looked shocked, but not because the words had been spoken. She looked shocked because I wasn't saying anything. I didn't ask them to repeat themselves. I didn't demand an apology. I didn't raise my voice. I simply pushed my chair back from the table, carried my plate to the sink, rinsed it under warm water, and walked upstairs without looking at anyone. Behind me, I could hear Emily calling my name. "Nathan!" I kept walking. For years, I had imagined what I would say if this moment ever arrived. I pictured long speeches about respect, loyalty, sacrifice, and gratitude. I thought I would remind them of every baseball game, every dance recital, every late-night drive to urgent care, every bill that quietly disappeared because I had paid it before anyone else even knew it existed. Instead, I felt nothing. Or maybe I felt everything at once. The bedroom was dark except for the light coming through the window. I sat on the edge of the bed and listened to the sounds downstairs. Plates being cleared, cabinet doors opening and closing, the television turning on. Life continued, as though I had not just been erased inside my own home. That realization hurt more than their words. I opened the drawer of my nightstand and took out a small notebook where I tracked our household finances. Every recurring payment was written there in my own handwriting. Mason's travel baseball dues, Chloe's competitive dance tuition, monthly deposits into both college savings accounts, phone plans, streaming subscriptions, auto insurance, even the emergency credit card I had quietly added Mason to after he got his driver's license. Page after page, line after line, responsibility after responsibility. I stared at those pages for a long time. Then I reached for my laptop. There was no anger in the way I logged into the bank, no trembling hands, no dramatic hesitation, just clarity. The college account for Mason came first. I selected the option to close future contributions. The screen asked if I was sure. Yes. The transfer disappeared. Then Chloe's account. The same question. The same answer. Yes. Next came the automatic payment for Mason's travel baseball organization. Canceled. Dance tuition. Canceled. The installment plan for Chloe's upcoming competition in Chicago. Canceled. Phone upgrades scheduled for the following month. Canceled. One by one, years of voluntary support disappeared with the quiet click of a mouse. I wasn't taking anything that belonged to them. I was simply refusing to keep giving what had never been appreciated. There is a difference. People confuse generosity with obligation. I had made that mistake myself. Around midnight, Emily came upstairs. She knocked softly before opening the bedroom door. "Nathan?" I looked up. Her eyes were red. "They're kids." I said nothing. "They didn't mean it." I closed the laptop. "They looked me in the eye," I answered quietly. They knew exactly what they meant. She sat beside me. "You know, teenagers say awful things." "I do. So don't let one sentence destroy everything." I turned toward her for the first time that evening. "It wasn't one sentence." She frowned. "It was 10 years. She didn't answer, because she knew I was right. Every ignored request, every laugh, every correction, every time Mason introduced Kevin as his only father while I stood 5 feet away, every time Chloe dismissed me with that polite little smile reserved for strangers, every time Emily asked me to be patient instead of asking them to be respectful, it had all led here. This wasn't an accident. It was the truth, finally spoken aloud. The next morning, I woke before sunrise. Coffee tasted bitter. The house was still asleep. I finished canceling the remaining automatic payments, then printed a simple list showing everything I had been covering for Mason and Chloe over the years. When Emily came into the kitchen, I slid the paper across the table. She scanned the page. Her expression changed with every line. I didn't realize. No, you never told me it was this much. I didn't think I needed to." She looked at me, frightened now. "What happens next?" I folded my hands on the table. "Everything involving Mason and Chloe now belongs to you and Kevin." Her face lost its color. "You can't be serious." "I've never been more serious in my life." Before she could answer, footsteps echoed down the hallway. Mason walked into the kitchen, still half asleep. He reached for a box of cereal without even looking at me. For the first time in years, I let him. Mason poured his cereal like nothing had changed. That was the part that almost made me laugh. Not because it was funny, nothing about that morning had humor in it, but because the arrogance was so complete, so untouched by doubt, that it stood there in the kitchen with him like a second body. He didn't know yet that the floor beneath his life had already split open. He didn't know the accounts were closed, the payments canceled, the invisible machinery of my sacrifice shut down before sunrise. He only knew he was hungry, so he ate. Chloe came down 10 minutes later, phone in hand, eyes lowered, thumb moving across the screen. She didn't say good morning. She didn't look at me. She kissed Emily on the cheek, stepped around my chair, and opened the refrigerator. Just Nathan, the stranger with the mortgage. Emily sat across from me with the printed list still trembling in her hands. I could see her reading the numbers again and again, as though repetition might make them smaller. Baseball fees, dance tuition, school costs, insurance, phones, college deposits, thousands upon thousands of dollars, carried so quietly for so long that even she had mistaken my endurance for ease. Finally, she whispered, "You have to undo this." Mason stopped chewing. Chloe looked up. I took a sip of coffee. "No." Emily's voice sharpened. "Nathan, this is their future." "No," I said. "It was my money." The room changed then. Mason's spoon lowered into the bowl. Chloe's phone slipped from her attention. They had heard irritation from me before. They had seen disappointment. They had watched me try to hold rules together while Emily softened every consequence behind my back. But they had never heard finality. Mason stared at me. "What are you talking about?" I turned toward him, slowly. "I stopped paying for your travel baseball." His face went blank. Then I looked at Chloe. "And your dance tuition." She blinked once, like the words had arrived in a language she didn't understand. Emily stood. "Nathan, don't do this in front of them." "I should have done it in front of them years ago." Mason pushed back from the table. "You can't just stop paying." There it was. Not sorrow, not shame, possession. I looked at him and felt something inside me turn cold. I can. But the season already started. Then Kevin can pay. His mouth tightened. Dad doesn't have money for that. Dad. The word landed exactly where he meant it to land. I nodded. Then Dad has a problem. Chloe's face flushed. That's not fair. I almost admired the innocence of it. Fair. A word children use when they discover the world has stopped bending around them. I leaned back in my chair. Fair was me treating you like mine while you told the world I wasn't. Fair was me paying for futures I wasn't allowed to belong to. Fair was Carter and Ava watching me get disrespected under my own roof while I kept rewarding the people doing it. Emily said my name like a warning. I ignored her. My voice stayed calm. That seemed to frighten them more than shouting would have. You told me I was nothing to you, so I believed you. Chloe's eyes darted to Emily. Mason scoffed, but the sound was weak now. You're seriously doing this because of what we said? No, I answered. I'm doing this because it was true. Silence. Heavy. Sick. Emily moved around the table toward me, lowering her voice. Please, we can talk about this privately. We did things privately for years, I said. That's how we got here. By noon, Kevin was in my driveway. Of course he was. He arrived in the same dented pickup he had driven for years, wearing sunglasses and indignation like he had paid for either one. Mason and Chloe rushed outside before he even reached the porch. Emily followed them, arms crossed tight against her chest. I stayed in the doorway. Kevin pointed at me before saying hello. What the hell is wrong with you? I looked past him at Mason and Chloe. They stood behind him like witnesses for the prosecution, except the crime was that I had stopped financing their contempt. Kevin stepped closer. Emily says you canceled everything. That's right. You don't get to do that. I almost smiled. I already did. His jaw worked. You've been helping them for years. You can't just walk away now because your feelings got hurt. There it was again, helping. As if I had been handing out spare change. As if years of labor were some casual favor that could be demanded once accepted long enough. I stepped onto the porch. They said I was nothing to them. Kevin glanced back at the kids, then shrugged. They're teenagers. Then their parents can teach them. He frowned. That's low. No, I said. Low is letting another man carry your children while they worship you for doing less than nothing. His face darkened. Emily gasped softly behind him, but I didn't stop. You wanted the title, Kevin. Take the bill with it. For the first time, he had no answer, because everyone standing there knew the truth. He could be the hero when heroism required a birthday visit, a weekend fishing trip, a photo online, a promise he might or might not keep. But tuition, insurance, thousands in college savings, monthly expenses that arrived whether he felt fatherly or not, that kind of fatherhood had been mine, until now. Mason looked between us, and something uncertain entered his face. Good. Let uncertainty in. Let it sit down at the table where entitlement used to eat. Kevin lowered his voice. You're hurting them. I shook my head. No, I'm letting their real parents support them. Emily started crying then, not loud, not dramatic, just enough to remind everyone that her grief had finally arrived, now that the money was gone. But where had it been when I was being erased? Where had her tears been when Mason laughed at my rules? Where had they been when Chloe corrected people who called me family? Where had they been when I sat in the garage after work, too tired to come inside and be treated like an intruder? I looked at her and felt the marriage shift beneath us. Maybe crack, maybe break. I begged you for years to stand with me, I said quietly. You told me to be patient. She wiped her face. I didn't think it would come to this. No, I said. You thought I would keep taking it. That hurt her, I saw it. I did not take it back. Kevin left after 20 minutes of arguing in circles. He promised Mason he would figure something out. He told Chloe not to worry. He told Emily they would talk. He told everyone everything except the truth. The truth was simple. He couldn't replace me. Within a week, the first notices arrived. Mason's baseball coach emailed about missed payments. Chloe's studio called Emily twice, then sent a formal warning. The phone company confirmed the canceled upgrades. The college accounts no longer showed deposits. Small doors began closing, one by one, quietly. The sound was beautiful and terrible. Mason stopped joking at dinner. Chloe stopped smirking when I entered her room. Emily spent evenings on the phone with Kevin, her voice rising, falling, breaking. Carter and Ava watched from the edges of the house, old enough to understand that something important had changed. One night, Carter came into the garage while I was sorting tools. He stood beside me for a while without speaking. Then he said, "Dad, are you okay?" I looked at my son, my real son, and felt the question cut deeper than all the insults Mason and Chloe had ever thrown. Because Carter should not have had to ask that. Ava should not have had to grow up seeing her father treated like a bank with a heartbeat. I placed a wrench back in the drawer. "I'm getting there." He nodded, but his eyes were serious. That night, I understood something I should have understood years earlier. My endurance had become a lesson, not the noble kind. I had taught Mason and Chloe they could take without gratitude. I had taught Emily that silence had no cost. Worst of all, I had taught Carter and Ava that love meant allowing yourself to be diminished as long as the house stayed calm. No more. The balance had changed. And for the first time, it was not changing back. The house grew quieter with every passing week. Not because we had learned how to communicate, because nobody knew what to say anymore. The arguments stopped almost as suddenly as they had begun. Emily no longer tried to convince me to restore the payments. Kevin stopped making angry phone calls after discovering that outrage did not create money. Mason and Chloe, for the first time since I'd known them, found themselves facing problems that could not be solved by assuming I would quietly step in before things became uncomfortable. Reality has a different voice than pride. It speaks through overdue notices, through canceled registrations, through opportunities that disappear while everyone searches for someone else to blame. I watched it happen without satisfaction. People imagine revenge feels exciting. It doesn't. It feels heavy. Every evening I drove home from work, parked in the driveway, and sat behind the steering wheel for a few extra minutes. The silence inside the truck had become easier to live with than the silence waiting inside the house. I would watch the porch light glow against the evening sky and wonder how many years I had mistaken endurance for love. Too many, far too many. Mason quit talking about college. At first I assumed he was simply avoiding me, but Carter mentioned one afternoon that he had overheard Mason telling a friend he wasn't sure he would be able to attend the university he wanted anymore. The scholarship covered only part of the expenses. The savings account I had built over the years had been the missing piece. Now it no longer existed. Chloe's dance studio replaced her in the upcoming regional competition after Emily admitted she could not afford the remaining tuition. I passed the family room one evening and found Chloe sitting alone with her dance shoes beside her. She wasn't crying. She was staring at them, as though trying to understand how something she believed would always be there had simply vanished. For years, I had watched them take every sacrifice for granted. Now they were discovering where those sacrifices had come from. Emily changed too. She stopped saying, "They're just teenagers." She stopped telling me to be patient. Instead, I would sometimes catch her standing in the kitchen with unpaid bills spread across the counter, calculator in one hand, forehead resting against the other. The confidence she had carried for years slowly disappeared, as she realized just how much of our stability had rested on work she had never fully seen. One Friday evening, she found me in the garage. I was reorganizing an old toolbox, more interested in sorting screws than discussing feelings. She stood quietly for a moment before speaking. "I owe you an apology." I kept working. "For what?" "For all of it." The words came slowly. "I thought love meant you would always keep giving." I placed the screwdriver back into its drawer. "So did I," she swallowed. "I should have defended you." "Yes." "I should have corrected them." "Yes." "I thought things would eventually get better." I looked at her. "So did I." Neither of us spoke for several seconds. Some apologies arrive too late to repair what they acknowledge. They simply become evidence that the damage was real. The biggest change came from the children. Not immediately. Pride rarely disappears overnight. But little by little, the sharpness faded. Mason started answering when I spoke, not warmly, respectfully. When I asked him to help carry groceries, he did it without pretending he hadn't heard me. When the trash needed to be taken outside, he no longer waited for Emily to repeat my request. Chloe began helping around the house without being asked. She cleaned the kitchen after dinner. She folded laundry alongside Ava. One Saturday morning, she even thanked me after I fixed the brakes on her bicycle. It was a simple sentence, 2 words, "Thank you." Years earlier, those words would have filled me with hope. Now they only made me thoughtful. Respect offered after consequences feels different than respect freely given. It still matters. but it carries the weight of lessons learned the hard way. Carter and Ava noticed everything. One evening, Carter sat beside me on the back porch while the sun disappeared behind the trees. "You know," he said quietly, "I think Mason finally understands." I watched the neighborhood settle into evening. "I hope he understands more than losing money." Carter nodded. "So do I." That conversation stayed with me. Because this had never been about college accounts, or baseball, or dance lessons. Money had simply revealed something deeper. The real debt inside our house had never been financial. It had been respect. I thought about the younger version of myself, the man who believed he could earn permanent acceptance by solving every problem before anyone else noticed it existed. I wanted to tell him that generosity without boundaries eventually teaches people to confuse love with obligation. I wanted to tell him that silence protects the wrong people. I wanted to tell him that children learn not only from what you give them, but from what you allow them to take. Most of all, I wanted to tell him that being needed is not the same as being valued. I finally understood the difference. Months later, the atmosphere inside the house no longer felt hostile. It felt honest. Mason still called Kevin his father. He always would. That no longer bothered me. Titles mattered less than actions. Kevin remained inconsistent, helping when he could, disappearing when life became inconvenient. Emily no longer defended him. She didn't have to. Reality had done that work for her. As for me, I continued supporting Carter and Ava exactly as I always had. They deserved a father who showed them that kindness and self-respect could exist together. I still cared about Mason and Chloe. That had never disappeared. Love does not vanish simply because it is wounded. But love without dignity eventually destroys the person offering it. I refused to become that man again. Looking back now, I don't regret stopping. I regret waiting so long before I did. If I had continued paying, smiling, and pretending nothing was wrong, everyone in that house would have learned the same dangerous lesson. That sacrifice should be endless, gratitude optional, and respect unnecessary. Instead, we all learned something different. A family cannot survive on money alone. It cannot survive on obligation. It cannot survive on guilt. It survives only when every person inside it understands that love and respect must walk together. The day those two things become separated, someone eventually pays the price. For years, that someone was me.
Never again. So tell me, was I wrong for finally believing their words? Or would you have continued financing the lives of people who looked you in the eye and told you that you were nothing?